the nothing but the soil in the earth, breaking through the rocks, growing wild and tall till the buds begin to pop. So pack me in a bowl or roll me in a spliff, while you're breaking me down, you can feel your fingers stick.
Hello and welcome to The Smoking Spot, a really good podcast about weed. I'm Ryan Herron here in Portland, Oregon.
And I'm Amanda Breeze here in Toronto.
And today with us, we've got the host of the Bite Me podcast. Marge is with us here today, and we're going to kind of talk about what her and Amanda have been up to up in Canada, what's current with the Bite Me podcast, and everything else that we can get into about our favorite plant over the next 45 minutes or so.
Marge, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited you're here too. So Marge has been my Polkeroo. And that's not a reference Ryan's going to get because he's American.
No, it's not. So I imagine this is a thing on the Tim Hortons menu.
Right. It should be, though. It really should be.
Good guess, though. No, a Polkeroo is a very Canadian thing. It was a TV show in the 90s where the main dude would leave the show and dress up like Polkeroo, this like giraffe character. And then when the giraffe would leave, the man would come back. So it's like when you say someone's like a Polkeroo, it's because you just keep missing them. Because when the man would come back, they would say, "You just missed Polkeroo," and he'd be like, "Oh man." So me and Marge just keep missing each other over the past like 5 years.
Yeah, I think so.
At all of these events. Yeah. So we had the pleasure of actually never meeting in person until we got to spend an entire weekend together last weekend.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome. And I still got invited to come on your show, so it must have gone pretty good.
Well, I got to say, she makes a mean marshmallow.
Well, somebody who spends a lot of their time thinking about food and edibles and cooking, I should hope could master a marshmallow.
Yeah, you would think, but they're still pretty easy to burn, so.
The fire was hot.
Yeah.
So we were at Camp Canna all weekend. So we spent it in like the most glamorous campsite I've ever been to in my entire life.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was that I've been to a lot of summer camps as a kid too, and this was definitely up there among the best, I would say.
What was your highlight of the weekend? Because there was like a lot of activities that were happening.
Oh, I don't even know how you narrow it down, but I will say that I tried the archery and I was crushing at archery. So I'm like, maybe I need to take up a new hobby where I can actually like do really good at it. So that was a lot of fun.
I actually love that because I just imagine Camp Canna as like hey, we've all got tents set up and then we will entertain ourselves. That's what it is. And then every time I talk to somebody who actually went, they're like, "Oh, it was really fun doing the archery or whatever." I'm like, that sounds like the summer camps I went to. And so that's really perfect.
Yeah.
No, it was super glamorous, really good food all weekend. There was archery, there was swimming, there was floating toys, there was a ropes climbing course. This was not even intense. We all had gorgeous cabins, and Marge was in the High Ladies cabin.
I was, yes.
Who are friends of the podcast, and also Blunts and Beans organized the whole weekend, who are also friends of the podcast. So honestly, it was like a whole Canna fam weekend.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was amazing. We're both tanned. And I'm also wearing my Camp Canna shirt.
Should have worn mine because we did tie-dye too. We had tie-dye activity, which was a lot of fun. They brought in a live band on Saturday night, so that was really awesome. Yeah, the whole thing was just like really well done. I would definitely go again.
Oh yeah, so we should fly out to the Alberta one for sure.
Yeah.
Although I do have to let our listeners know that unfortunately I was disqualified during the Can-Olympics.
Oh, yes, we need to hear about that this year because last year you won or you came very close to winning. Is that true? Yes. And this year you got disqualified for cheating, I imagine.
We've talked a lot about the Can-Olympics because that's is very important to me to win, and I was hyping it up. But the first challenge, did you participate, Marge? Did you do the Can-Olympics, or were you an observer?
No, I was hanging out down by the docks on the water. Yeah,
love that. The Can-Olympic challenge 1 was like a hot potato round.
What is hot potato as far as weed is concerned?
They had a blunt, and we had to pass it around. And if the music stopped and you were holding it, you were pulled out. But I will say passing around like a blunt is really hard because it's kind of flimsy. So it's actually quite challenging. And then you didn't want to light it because the music might stop. And then in the end, we just had this blunt that just had everyone's hands all over it. So no one really wanted to smoke it.
Yeah.
Honestly, that was probably the most busted of the rounds.
Yeah. This is why in a cakewalk, you're not passing around the cake.
Yeah.
It's a prize that's set off to the side. Yes.
In, all fingers. Yeah. And then round 2 was to make an apple bowl. And I just rewatched the footage. And honestly, I've never been prouder because I think I made an apple bowl in 3 seconds.
That is impressive.
I'm not even joking. Think I made it in like 3. The thing with the Camp Olympics is it is my skill set. These things are really truly where my best skills are. So making an apple bowl, not dropping the blunt. I'm like, these are things that I've honed. Round 3 was you had to open legal containers.
Mm.
So with the childproof bits and bobs. And the rule was if your team breaks the container, the whole team's disqualified.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No.
And my teammate, Adam, he broke the container. We were all disqualified.
Wow.
That's why you didn't win. Not because of your skill set.
Fuck. You know what? I want to take some responsibility if Adam's listening because I know he felt really bad. And actually, the moment of me learning, I left to go hydrate for the next round. I was like, I got to be hydrated. I got to be ready. I ran to my cabin. I chugged a bunch of water. Like I was in it to win it. And I came back and they were like, your team's disqualified. And someone captured on film the moment of me going through all the 7 stages of loss.
You know the people that put on this event, and you need to tell them, look, this is not a team thing. I cannot rely on my friends, especially my stoner friends, to show up when I need them to. So yeah, it needs to be solo. And I want to see some real skills out there, like lighting a joint in a hurricane winds. That's the kind of skills I need.
Maybe we'll do, I heard rumors of a rain simulator.
The rain simulator.
Start rolling those joints in the rain. Yeah.
That's what I'm going to do every time it rains. So yeah, unfortunately, I did not defend my title. Another year in a row. Didn't even place this year. So it's okay. But we all learn. And actually, Marge apparently is amazing at archery. So we're all picking up skills along the way. And
I mean, I'm already practicing, and I'm not even sure I'm going to attend next year, but I'm all over it.
We got to do it. So yeah, honestly, that was my second Camp Canna. 10 out of 10. Marge?
Yeah, 10 out of 10, 100%.
So one of the sponsors for the weekend was this Canadian edibles company called Jubilee. And honestly, I feel like I just got to give them a little shout out because they fueled the entire weekend with edibles. It was non-stop.
Yeah, they brought a ton, and I ate a lot of those.
What do you think about them? As an edible maker yourself, like what do you think about that product?
There are certain flavors I definitely liked better than others, but I do like that format of edible, if you will. I really enjoy it. It's sort of like a little energy, like mini energy bite, I guess. So I really do like them a lot. And they're very portable and easy to throw in a bag. And yeah, they had different ratios, which was great. So you have something for like every occasion, which is also nice.
I do love that I'm seeing that so much more often, like edible companies or companies that are producing an edible, releasing a line. And from day one, you've got like the CBN, you've got a CBG, you've got a 1-to-1 or maybe a 1-to-1-to-1. And so they're recognizing many folks who are eating edibles are looking for a very specific experience and something that, especially for something that's going to be digested, terpenes are probably not going to modulate as much as cannabinoids would. Mm-hmm. So I think that's really exciting. Marge, what do you tend to produce? What are your edibles? THC heavy or what do you go for?
They're usually THC heavy. Sometimes I do CBD stuff depending on what I'm making and who's going to be consuming it, because I do live with people who don't consume cannabis, but they are more open to CBD. So it depends on the type of thing that I'm making. But if it's something sweet, it's usually THC heavy for sure.
Okay, so you've got a sweet tooth.
Oh, 100%. I always say that's half the reason I infuse my edibles or my sweet stuff is because it forces me to eat like a reasonable amount. Because otherwise I'm like, oh yeah, I could eat like 5 cookies in a row, but you can't if you're gonna get like way too high. So
Okay. I'm a cookie monster. Like I will wake up from the couch at like, oh, it's 11:55 and I should have gone to bed already. And then go raid the pantry
Right.
right then, like on my way to the bed with like cookie crumbs falling out of my mouth. So I totally hear you there. If the one option I had was like 100 milligrams worth of brownie bites, I would just eat my little nightly 10 milligrams, 20 if I was really feeling it, and then leave the rest for later. So
exactly.
I have not heard that as like a little skill for getting your late nights in without overindulging, but I'm all over it.
I would literally eat like a bag of gummies. I could crush a bag of gummies, like no problem. As soon as I start eating one, it's like it's danger zone. That 1 pound bag gone. But if I infuse them, then I'm much more reasonable because I have done that before too. Actually, I've made cookies before, and then they were so good, and I'm like, oh my god, these are so good. They're still warm from the oven, and I remember eating some, and then I was like, I'll just have one more, and then I was like, maybe just one more. They're not that big, but I called into work the next day because I woke up like so high. And like I knew better, but I was just like, fuck it, I'm gonna do it anyway. And then I paid the price. So it's been a couple years since I've done that, but yeah, I won't be doing it again because it wasn't a good time.
For me, it's also like when you're making something sweet, like a batter,
Hmm.
you're like, oh, well, I should probably lick this entire bowl and like
You don't want to waste it, but
little nibbles of like the dough. And, you're like, oh, yeah, it is really good, especially when you just add the butter and the sugar and it's like a little crunchy and you're like, raw cookie dough. So then before they're even out of the oven, I'm usually pretty toasty.
yeah, you can get pretty baked that way. And I will say, like, when I was a kid, like as a teenager, that just brought me back because my sister and I used to make like cookie dough after school when we came home because my parents were like super healthy, health conscious, and they never bought junk food. So we would literally like make half a recipe of something and just eat the dough.
Okay, so you've been a baker. Do you consider yourself a baker? Because you do a variety of delicious infused things.
Why, thank you. And no, I don't. I don't consider myself much of a baker. Like, I've baked bread a lot in the past, but beyond edibles, before I really started making a lot of edibles, I didn't really bake that much before. I'm like, what's the point? But when you can infuse it, that changed everything, and now I bake. So,
Because I think that's one of the things that like always that I like about your podcast is the variety of things that you're infusing.
right.
It's I know we're talking about cookies, which is like cookies, brownies, it's like the most obvious thing to infuse, but there's so much variety. Like can you introduce our listeners to your awesome podcast? Because Ryan, I learned this weekend that Marge has been podcasting for almost 5 years.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, there's a really nice back catalog there to go
Yeah,
through.
yeah. So the show is called Bite Me, the show about edibles, and is bitemepodcast.com online. You can find it pretty much on your favorite podcasting platform. And I do episodes every Thursday. I've probably missed like a couple episodes in those 5 years, I would say. And I'm usually doing a solo episode where I've infused something in my kitchen, and that does run the gamut. Yes, I've done lots of cookies because I love cookies and they are a classic edible, but I just did one recently. It was like a spicy pineapple margarita. I've done lots of beverages, all kinds of savory stuff. Like you name it, I've probably tried it at some point. And then I also love to interview people on my show too. So I've done a lot of interviews, which has been amazing.
What are some of your standouts of the past few months of interviews?
I don't even know where to start in a way because I feel like anytime somebody's just like, yes, I will come on your show, I'm like, oh my God, yay. Like it doesn't really matter who it is because if I'm asking them to be on my show, it's because I'm interested. But my last week's episode actually was with Jamie Evans, the herbs lady.
Oh.
Yes. And that was like a real feather in my cap in some senses for me because I think I asked her a couple years ago to appear on my show, and I think she politely declined at the time, maybe. I can't remember how it went, but she's like always been lovely to me when we've connected on Instagram. But yeah, then she finally said yes, and I was so excited. I tried not to fangirl, but I'm pretty sure I did okay. But might have to go back and listen again.
Guilty. I can't not fangirl because sometimes you really do interview people that truly wow you.
Yeah.
Because we've done a few authors lately, and I'm always wowed. Like, I'm always wowed by that. I'm totally fangirling all the time. I would definitely fangirl Jamie Evans, and she just did. I mean, she just did that a whole cocktail book.
Yeah, I haven't seen that yet. The spicy pineapple margarita was from her the High Times Let's Get Baked book, and then she does have this new cocktails book coming out, I think in July. And then speaking of authors, you know, they say never meet your heroes, but I met Anne Alchin at Camp Canna, and it was like so nice because we kind of connected over Instagram, and then she came on my show a few months ago as well. And found we had like a lot in common. I'm like, I'm going to this Camp Canna thing. Maybe you should think about coming. And she was just like, okay, I'll come. And so we met in person for the first time, and that was really awesome. So that was another really cool interview too.
Oh my gosh, I love Anne so much because similarly to you, like, you know, you follow people's work, you become a fan, and we're just regular people, you know, we're all going to the same camp. We all just want to smoke some weed and hang out in the sun. But Anne was one of the authors who came to my first literary showcase at Can Expo a few months ago.
Yes.
And Anne has just put out, she just takes the edible artistry to a whole new level. Her books are so like multifaceted, right? Like there's just so much more than just a cookbook. There's just like so much there. And as a person, she really is like that. She's like, okay, let's do it.
But she took a chance because I was just like, you should come and we can like be in each other's cabins and stuff. It was so much like going back to summer camp as a kid. Will you be in my cabin? It worked out really well because there is also that, you know, when you talk with somebody through the podcast, you chat a little bit before and after maybe, and then we've talked on Instagram, but you never really know or get a sense for a person until you meet them in real life. And I've had experiences like where you talk to somebody online and then you meet them in real life and you're like, I don't really vibe with you that much, but Anna and I totally vibed, so it was good. It worked out in the end.
She's totally
Yeah,
vibes. So we love
yeah,
Anne too on this podcast.
yeah.
You know, a set and setting goes for meeting people as well, because at Hall of Flowers or something, it is totally a different vibe. It doesn't sound like there was a lot of like slipping business cards into people's hands over
No.
the weekend at this thing. It was more like you said, hey, I'm playing Uno in my cabin at like 3 o'clock. You know, like we need a fourth, or you want to swing by?
Yeah, and I think I prefer to like meet people this way going forward forever. Like forget the trade show conference floor or whatever. I'd rather let's go to camp and then we'll find out what you're really like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, after 6 joints and a crowd of people on mushrooms. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
pretty much sums it up. But I know that the cabin thing was a vibe because I was like, a lot of people were nervous who they were going to get bunked with,
Yeah.
which is fair because we're all grown. Like, I mean, first of all, it's 19 plus, but I would say most of the people that were there were probably 30s.
Oh yeah. 40s.
Yeah, like 30s. It was an adult crowd, although we all think each other are like 27. Apparently. And there was a lot of other podcasters there with us. I think it's like a testament to how fun we all are.
Right. Of course. Podcasting's awesome.
Newbie and the
Yeah.
Doobie were there also.
Yes. Yeah. And that was fun. And they've been on my show before too. And I've met them because they do all the events and they're so like out there, which is amazing. But to actually just hang out with them again in a way more laid back, it was really nice to get them to know them more on a more personal level too. So they were great guests as well that I've had on my show. And I've interviewed a lot of really interesting people and I love it. And it's because my show has listenership that's actually almost more skewed to the US. I interview a lot of US chefs and edibles makers and stuff like that too. So it gives me a pretty interesting look at the industry, I guess, from both sides of the border as well.
I also love it because I feel like there never really runs out of things you learn or things to talk about. We recently featured Crop Circle chocolate truffle makers who are based out of Oregon. And, you know, you're like, okay, it's an infused edible. They're beautiful. But everyone has such a unique approach and how they've come to the plant or how they've grown their business or how they've just, you know, mastered the products that they're doing. What brought you into the cannabis space?
Well, I mean, I've been a cannabis consumer off and on for most of my adult life. And I've done all kinds of things. Like I've grown weed before you could. And, you know, although at the time when I was doing that, I wasn't really consuming cannabis that much because I found I was one of those people where it can make me really paranoid. And so I discovered edibles because we had so much shake, and we're like, I'm going to make some butter, see what happens. Because just you have all this stuff, you might as well try it. And it was like the most laborious thing I've ever done in my life. Like I was just like standing at the stove for 2 hours stirring this butter. And I'm sure, I don't know how I didn't overdose myself, but I probably made some brownies after. And I was just like, I really like the edibles high. It was so different and it didn't make me paranoid. And I could still like have a conversation with people, which was pretty key because when I get really paranoid when I smoke weed, I'm like, I'm just going to go hide now, which is kind of the antithesis of weed most of the time. But edibles was like, I don't know, whatever it is, it just vibes with my body. So, um, I also happen to be a huge listener of podcasts as well. So I was like, I'm going to start a cannabis podcast about edibles because I found that I really liked making them. And, I started out like a lot of podcasters do, just putting out an episode, and maybe a couple weeks later, I would do another one. And it sort of continued like that for a couple months until I got my first fan letter, fan mail, email, if you will. And the person's like, I love your show. And I was just like, oh, maybe I should just keep doing this. So I did. And that's kind of how I ended up here 5 years later.
Oh, I love that.
Well, it's also really cool. Like I can see how you attract fans, especially because your podcast kind of runs the gamut. It's not just super focused on chocolate chip cookies. You're making savory things, you're making drinks, you're bringing people on that are in the industry, that are also making food or pushing things to like the next tier or the next level. So I think it's really great in the way that you've taken kind of a niche subject and broaden it just enough that almost anyone in the industry that's slightly interested can hop on and find something that they like totally connect with.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think it's interesting because like the show is probably more geared to people who are making edibles themselves at home. But I also bring on edibles makers who are bringing stuff to market because I feel like most people who consume cannabis and have access to a legal dispensary or dispensaries of any kind are still going out and buying them from time to time. Like I still buy edibles, not frequently because I can make them for pennies on the dollar, but and they taste really good and I know exactly what's in them. But I still like to see what's out there. And I really love companies that are doing interesting stuff or doing things a little bit different. Like I had Zach Squire on my show recently, who does Squire's specialty elixirs. I listened to your episode about the truffle makers as well. And I'm that's like, that's the kind of stuff I love too. So I've had some people who are doing really cool stuff in the edible space. So there's something for everyone, I think.
Yeah, definitely. This weekend, there was some infused moonshine. No, not moonshine, infused tequila.
Oh, was there?
Have you ever
Yeah.
tried it like an infused, like when the liquor itself is infused?
Well, when I did the spicy pineapple margarita, you infuse the tequila with hot peppers. So yes. And it's fantastic. Yeah. Yeah. I did it with jalapenos because that's what the store had when I went at the time. But she recommends serrano peppers. So it'd be even spicier. And she was like, if you really want to pump up the heat, you could do habaneros. And I would love to try that sometimes.
I can see Ryan's eyes are lighting up. Ryan really enjoys a good fancy cocktail.
Right.
Yes, and spice. I electively burn myself up. I'm the only one at the dinner table like actively sweating like, "Oh, this is delicious." And everybody's like, "Are you okay? You did that to yourself, right?"
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm all over this. Booze, especially tequila, cannabis, and spice. I mean, I'm not going anywhere. I'm just gonna keep out until that stuff is gone.
Yeah.
I don't I have to watch out. I did try an infused moonshine one time, but I did not know it was infused because when they offered it, they said it's tequila with banana goo. And what I should have put the pieces together because I was on a weed farm.
And the banana goo was the weed.
That was the
Right.
strain. But in my head, I was like, oh, it's a banana flavored liquor. Okay.
I can see how you'd make that mistake. And then how did that work out?
Well, when they gave it to me, they said, just let it touch your lips. Don't even swallow it. It's really strong. Like just let it touch your lips. But I was like, oh, free booze. And I was like, glug, glug, glug. And everyone was like, no. Yeah. Not when you
Not not the best experience, maybe, when they're like, "Just let it touch your lips," and you're like, "This is my time to shine," and then
Literally, I was like, "I'm gonna get shined. Here we go." And
Wow.
yeah, and then I didn't even realize what I had done till days later. I was like, "Why was I? Ah, man, I was really messed up. That was weird." Because for me, a lot of edibles bring me to a bit of a more scared place of the mind.
Okay. So you're almost like the opposite of I than I am,
So I
right?
really envy and appreciate people who can have the tolerance and the taste to enjoy an
Right.
edible. But for me, I for some reason, if I eat anything over like 20 milligrams, which often homemade edibles are, I am just convinced I'm going to be like abducted by aliens. Very specifically, this is not. I'm not. This isn't like a metaphor. This is real.
Well, I'll have to give you some of my edibles sometimes because I like the 20 milligram range myself, so I don't tend to make them much stronger than that because I would rather eat more than one than eat one cookie. Like, if I can, like, make them 10 each or something, then I can have a couple cookies or whatever instead of just one, but yeah. Some people do make their homemade edibles, like, so strong, it's yeah, it's scary.
It's good. It's a throwback to the old days, when you could just
Yeah.
throw it all in. And I like to use coconut oil for your infusions.
I use coconut oil or butter, oil, whatever I happen
I
to.
like to do the coconut oil. I like to do the wash technique so that you wash out some of the flavor and some of the coloring, but you keep the potency. So I always was like a big fan of like, oh, we have 2 pounds of shake. Let's put it in 1 cup of coconut oil and see what
Right,
happens.
and you end up with some pretty potent coconut oil.
I ended up at a friend's house, warned them, same thing. I was like, just let it touch your lips. You know what I mean? And they were like, it'll be fine. And they ate like, I think a teaspoon and they were high for like 4 days. Sometimes,
Yeah, I would believe that because I have a tea check as well, and it'll tell you, like, the milligrams per milliliter, and so a teaspoon is 5 milliliters, and I've messed up before by messing up those calculations, and it can be really that's a big mistake sometimes when something's like 15 milligrams per milliliter, and then you have 5 of those in a teaspoon, and you're like, "Oh, it's the same thing." Yeah.
yeah.
Oops. I don't know if I'm explaining myself very well. It makes sense in my mind,
Yeah.
but
It's always challenging to talk about volumes on a podcast.
I know.
Especially one where we have United States listeners and Canadian listeners. And
Right.
we just mix it all up. If I drink 3 inches of tincture tonight, the question mark, who knows how much I've ingested,
Yeah. And that is often the problem with homemade edibles too, is because you can never be like super sure. Like, again, I have a T check and people will also use online calculators and stuff, but there's often a lot of, you know, uncertainties here and there. But I think as long as people get like a good benchmark, because anytime somebody gives me an edible that they've made and they're like, I don't know how strong it is, I'm like, thank you. And then I'm almost like,
Yeah. I always put them in my freezer and then break off a corner or whatever. Be
yeah,
like, all right, for science. And then, who knows
yeah,
what happens to the rest. I think if you look in the back of my freezer, there's like 10 sandwich baggies of half-eaten cookies, brownies, and
right.
hamburger buns that I thought, oh, okay, I'll just break off a little corner and see what this is like.
Yeah, but when you don't have that benchmark, like I think maybe we've been a little spoiled by being in a legal framework too, because people have a better idea of the tolerance now and there's more options and people can talk about it more openly. So, yeah, if I'm getting a homemade edible and somebody's just like, here you go, but they can't give me any kind of idea of how strong it is, I'm really not interested in eating it.
And plus we're refining our tastes because this weekend Sheesh Sodas was at the event and they're infusing their drinks with the live hash rosin from Fresh Frozen, which is keeping the whole profile, which is really honestly elevating the edibles game. And then there's a lot of stuff with distillate, and I actually like a lot of distillate based edibles, but then sometimes you run into it where it's not mixed in. Like in the early days of legalization or pre-legalization, a lot of times they were just like injecting gummies with distillate.
Yes. Or spraying them.
Yeah, spraying. Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember
So you
that.
couldn't just like eat
Yeah.
half of one because you might get the half with the whole 100 milligrams or whatever they decided to put in one gummy.
Right.
Now I'm seeing this nice trend where things are dosed evenly and you can actually add a little bit more, refine your dosage.
Yeah, and I think consumers are expecting that more now too, because like I've had drink makers tell me before that sometimes in the process drinks are super challenging apparently to produce, and one of the issues can be sometimes that the distillate or whatever can sit on the top, which means you're also drinking all that cannabis in like the first couple of sips or whatever instead of spreading it out over the course of the drink, which can affect people differently. And I think people are just coming to expect they want their edibles precisely dosed when they're buying them in the dispensary. And I think that's fair as a consumer. If I see something that's labeled 10 milligrams, or if you're in the States and it's higher than that, I would, especially if you're pushing 100 milligrams, I want to know that this is precisely and accurately dosed before I consume it, because everyone has that story of eating too much, and it sucks. I'm gonna be blunt, it really sucks.
Yeah, and if you're somebody that's not, you know, used to, if you're not a daily cannabis user and you overindulge, and it's the once a month that you go, yeah, I'm hanging out with my friends, we're just gonna watch a movie. Somebody offered me a rainbow gummy, I popped it in my mouth, and then I had a terrible time for the rest of the night. You're not wanting to revisit that. There's not like a whole like let's get back on the horse about that, because you feel awful that night. The next day, you're kind of thinking, oh, what did I do wrong? You might be kind of having some like cannabis hangover type feelings. And there's not like this, like, oh, I want to get that right after you've screwed it up that badly. So it's great that we have people like Marge out here who is doing the like at home thing, but not space caking it, where it's just like shrug, good luck you guys, I don't know how much is in
Yeah.
here. And I notice that you do a lot, not a lot, but beverages is something you do play with. And like you
Mhm.
said, when there can be the problems of these like oils not being properly emulsified and sitting on top, and you get the whole thing in one sip, like how do you work around the issues of like oil and water and just doing beverages in general?
Well, when you're doing it at home, there's ways to emulsify it, and usually when you're making a beverage at home, you're probably making it and then consuming it not long after. And then you can also use like tinctures or alcohol as well, although some people don't want to mix those, but it's it's a lot different when you're doing it at home, because I feel like you can mix something and then if you're consuming it relatively quickly, things separating isn't really as big of a deal.
Yeah.
When you're manufacturing, obviously it's a lot different, because another thing I've heard people talk about is how the THC, if they don't do it properly, can degrade over time as well. They have to have certain liners on the cans and that kind of thing. So because that can also mean you buy a 10 milligram drink and then by the time you get it home, it's like 3 milligrams, because you don't know how long it's been from like one end of the process to the other. So that's something else that the manufacturers have to think about, making it even more complicated. So, so make your own. Although I do love buying drinks.
Amanda and I are the best people to talk about this with, because we're total snobs, but also down for novelty. I will go out of my way. I did, okay. In the United States, Mountain Dew has like a certain love that people go for. I'm not a huge fan of the profile, but I appreciate the novelty. And there is a flavor that until recently has been exclusive to Taco Bell called Baja Blast. Maybe you're entirely familiar with this, maybe you've never heard of it. And so, Taco Bell has their sort of late night craving stoner connotation. So Baja Blast is sort of like in the stoner pantheon of flavors that you might enjoy. And I noticed that one of the edible makers here, they do like a single 100 milligram gummy, typically made with distillate, decided to release a very limited, so they don't have to deal with the cease and desist, I'm sure, Baja Blast flavor. And I thought, that's cool. Let me go. I'm going to try one of these. And I got it. It's got a cool package with like the logo that's just like a little too close to the real thing. And unfortunately, the edible tastes like garbage. It's so bad.
Oh, that's so disappointing.
Yeah, it's got this really like overdone Loran candy flavoring oil to it on top of like a bad flavored, very grassy distillate type product. So ultimately, I think somebody said, you know what, this oil is terrible. What's a good way to just get it out the door? Let's put the bad beer in a fancy can, kind of a deal. So I really did like the novelty of the whole situation, but the reality of it was quite disappointing.
That's disappointing. You're like, finally, somebody's coming out with a flavor that I'm craving, and then it's like,
Or
crap.
just something fun, right? It seems like
Yeah,
almost everything here has to be
yeah.
watermelon just to be safe, right? And I think looking through some of the recipes, Marge, you've done like a infused feta pastry type thing. It's like, where's that on the edible market here where I can say I've never seen this one before?
And that's what I find like one of the reasons I like making edibles because when I walk into a dispensary and I'm looking around, it's like gummies, 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 and more gummies, and lots of gummies, and maybe a little bottle of hot sauce. But I can also make a bottle of hot sauce and get like more than 30 milliliters or whatever. And yeah, I mean, like, I applaud what these companies are doing because there's so many challenges. It's a double regulated industry. And I've only know this because I've talked to so many people in it. But, food regulations and cannabis regulations together, uh, it's just so many, they're just so regulated. And so there's only so much you can do. But when you're making your own, you can do a lot more interesting stuff that just doesn't translate into consumer packaged goods.
And it's a lot easier than people think it is.
Yes.
We've all honed our craft. I'm talking about the wash, you're talking about, the online calculators. There's little things that you're going to pick up along the way that's going to make it perfect, but it's really not actually that challenging to infuse any food. And that's why I love just like always, the coconut oil. I'm like, just make one really good batch of oil and then you get to play. Or you get to add it into anything.
Yeah. And I think that's a lot of people are intimidated by edibles because it seems like there's all these steps that you have to do, which if you do skip them, you're going to have less potent edibles. But at the end of the day, like you said, if you just sort of repeat the same process, if the outcome is what you like, then do your coconut oil with your preferred amount of cannabis. You don't need to be jamming ounces of weed into a cup of into a cup of coconut oil. You can go with a lot less than that. And yeah, I mean, I started out using boxed mixes of stuff, and I've been served very well by that. You make an oil or a fat of some kind, and then you get a box mix from the store, and you have edibles done. But don't forget the decarb. You got to decarb.
Yeah, if you want to make your bestie a medicated birthday cake, like that's the best time to do it.
Yeah, it's not nearly as difficult as people think. But, with anything that you're not familiar with, you tend to sort of overcomplicate things in your mind, I guess, and people do get pretty freaked out because of course, if you mess up, then the consequences are real in some respects. But that's you just go back to that age-old saying, go low, start low, go slow, which we've all heard a million times, but how true it is. I mean, that's why you hear it a million times. It's because that is the advice. No matter what you're consuming within cannabis, if it's your first time or your 100th time, just relax. You don't have to you don't have to start with the 100 milligram edible because so many people also think that if you're like a heavy smoker, that's going to translate into a high tolerance,
No.
and it does not. I have seen that firsthand with many people. It really doesn't. So,
Living
yeah.
proof. Living
Yeah.
proof. Alien abduction status cannot.
Yes.
I think that's like a really interesting thing to point out is just because you think you smoke tough doesn't mean you can eat the whole tray of brownies.
Yeah, it's very true. And I've talked to edibles makers too. The one fellow I talked to had a 1 milligram tolerance. And he was in the business of making edibles, but that also meant that a lot of the edibles he had available within his line were really low dose or like micro doses for those people that are out there. And I think now that we have legalization in more and more places, people are starting to see how wide, like how varied people's tolerances are, and having options at all levels, I think is wise. And I mean, in Canada, we're capped at 10 milligrams, which I do think is a little low because there's a lot of people who definitely need more than that. I mean, even if you're a 20 milligram person like I am or you are, Amanda, buying 2 packages of something gets really expensive if you want to have an experience, right? So it would be nice if they would raise those caps, but having those micro doses as well, I think is super important too.
And it is kind of crazy that you all are stuck there in your rec for recreation, a 10 milligram edible. When, as we were talking about with the crop circle guys, we went from 50 to 100 here, and almost universally every edible across the market went from 50 to 100. So it was just, and almost like with no price change either, which I mean, the saturation of cannabis here in Oregon is part of that. But also, just as soon as we doubled our limit, that's where everything went. And everything's got a little 10 milligram line on it, so you can finely cut it with a scalpel or whatever. But that is handy as well.
Yeah, I think it's nice because it recognizes again that the people's tolerances are all over the place. And until Canada probably changes that, I'm not really sure that the legacy market's going to go away either.
Right.
Why would somebody go to a dispensary and drop, like, if you have a 50 milligram tolerance, you're going to have to spend so much money to get high, basically, if you like edibles. It just doesn't make sense economically or you can make it yourself, which is, of course, what I like to do. But
I've worked with people who are dealing with pain management or dealing with anxiety issues who are literally eating 300 milligrams a day just to function. And
right.
it's not really a situation based in reality that they could go to a dispensary there in Canada and buy 30 packs of edibles just to make it through that day. So in that case, you might have to resort to making your own edibles, if those are kind of your tolerances. And we know that cannabinoid tolerance is elastic. So if you're somebody who relies on this every day, it's going to just get pushed and bumped up and bumped up. So 100 milligram dosage could creep up to 300 over the matter of months.
Yeah, so hopefully, I don't know if the government's listening. From everything I hear, they're not. So
I'm in the United States. So I think it's the exact opposite. I'm pretty sure they're listening to us as we speak,
right,
multiple microphones.
which is it's a shame too because I've talked to a lot of people out of the States who are making edibles, and they're like, "Yeah, we've looked at the Canadian market, but 10 milligrams is kind of shit." I'm like, "Yeah, I know, but would you please? You're doing cool stuff. I want them here." But I think until that changes, that's just the reality that we live in right now.
And that's why we got to go on little trips to Oregon to eat all delicious edibles.
Yes. Hey, come on down. We'll start with a crop circle and we
Yes.
won't stop till we get to the exotic gummies.
I love that. So, summer is coming. Is there any like special flavors that you think we should be considering?
Yeah. What are your kind of summer flavor profiles that you want to dig into?
Like, as far as making edibles go, I probably start to do more like salad dressings and stuff because I'm actually eating salads again.
Ooh, I didn't even think of salad dressing.
Yeah, and I do like making drinks again. I've done it before. I can't, it was a while ago, but like margaritas, you can make infused margaritas that are really good. And of course, they help beat the heat when it's really hot. So I just tend to go to lighter fare. I'm not baking as much probably either because it's just too hot. So yeah, I lighten things up.
Ooh, I like the salad dressing. That's such a good idea.
Yeah. And then if you know like how potent it is per say tablespoon or something, then you can drizzle it on and enjoy. Infused honey is really nice on a lot, like for a lot of things too. Yes, and that's actually something that's really nice for infusing beverages as well, because a lot of them will be sweetened with honey instead of oils, which means you don't have these same emulsification problems. I probably should have mentioned that earlier when we were talking about it, but I forgot because as someone who eats a lot of edibles, and I tell this to my audience all the time, if you're doing something, you're experimenting, or you think you found a ratio, write it down for the love of God, because you will forget. I don't know how many times I've been like, oh, I'll remember that. And then I come back to it later. I'm like, nope, no, I do not. So write it down. Note on your phone, like notebook for that purpose, whatever. I don't care. Just write it down because you won't remember.
I also really liked when if I'm infusing, like I would like to make a big batch of something and then I just have it on hand, right? I don't want to make an
Yes.
oil every single time I'm making
Yes.
a recipe. It's like it's so because it takes at least 3 to 6 hours to begin with. So I like to keep a batch on hand. I keep it in the fridge. I portion my coconut oil in mini muffin trays to be exactly 1 tablespoon. So I'm like, what I like to do is keep my recipe exactly the same for the oil. So, and then I write that down on the containers, like
Hmm.
exactly per teaspoon, per tablespoon, each milligram is. Often I'll even write the milliliter. Brian, you'll have to Google milliliter later. Anyway, it's basically a pen cap's worth.
Right.
That's some third grade math for you. And I like to just have it there on hand because then you can just throw it in and you don't have to do the math every single time. It's like you've already done the math for yourself in one sitting.
Yes.
Use it as needed. So, an infused Salad dressing. Maybe we're doing an olive oil. I'm thinking olive oil.
Mhm. And olive oil is a great one to have in your edibles pantry as well. I'm glad you mentioned the edibles pantry because I do like to make them in batches too, because I don't wanna start, like, doing the decarb and the infusion and then make something like, who's got the time for that? I don't. I want my edibles and I want them now. It's bad enough I have to wait to make them. But if you have the stuff all ready to go, then you don't have to worry about it. And labeling is also, of course, it almost goes without saying, super important. So I'm very glad to hear that you are labeling things because I've known many people that have inadvertently eaten something that was in a fridge or a freezer and they didn't know. And then next thing you know, they're like, oh my God, I'm really high.
No, I am very, very diligent with my labeling of the jars because I do forget and I make a lot of different things. So I have, the whole collection of different bottles and oils, but I have a dedicated drawer in my fridge because I often have a lot of house guests staying here. Toronto's very expensive, so people will crash here for a few nights if they're visiting. And I have a whole drawer that I've just labeled not food.
Yeah.
Always when people come over, I always say, if it doesn't look like food, it's not.
Right. Yeah, it will get you high.
And then you wake up and you come out and I'm spreading topical on my toast and it's just melting in beautifully. And I go, this lavender butter is amazing. And it was delicious. Yes.
So I'm quite diligent with my labeling, but similar to Ryan, I also have the secret freezer drawer, the one with all of the leftover miscellany, and I also like to keep the plant material. You try to squish out as much of the oil as you can, but there's always going to be a little left, and I toss them in freezer bags and I throw them in my freezer, and then I'll make like soap with them.
Oh, interesting.
Like I do like a cheater, the melted I'll buy like a 2 pounds of melt and pour soap. It's like
Yeah,
the cheaterist way to make soap. And
right.
I'll just mix a couple tablespoons in because it might be coated in cocoa butter or olive oil or whatever. So you're getting that nice skin softening. It's a little bit infused, but it's like really low effort and it makes a really nice gift.
Oh, that I love that. And, you can make soap with cannabis because I did interview a guy for my show one time that he uses the root ball from the cannabis plants,
Oh
and he infuses
wow.
it into I think it was I can't remember what he used exactly, but he had a whole soap making business that he was doing. Yeah, and he did recommend you don't use that infusion, like the root ball, for other food type things. He recommended you keep it for body care products, just because you can't always get all the dirt off, I think he was saying, but you really can use every part of the plant. So if you're a grower, you can use the root ball for your body care products, and you can use like your trim and your sugar leaf for making your edibles, and you can use your fan leaves for juicing. You know, you can use it all.
15 years ago, a lot of this stuff was considered waste that you would want to like
Yeah,
hide to throw away. People would like, take
yeah.
a mile drive up the road to throw their trim into a dumpster that wasn't associated with them. And now we're like, okay, how much per pound? Yeah, yeah, especially if it's good trim. So it's really cool to see like all of that stuff just getting used. And like if you know somebody or you're growing your own weed and you feel like all this trim stuff is kind of a waste, like just give it to somebody who can turn it into a kick-ass birthday cake or some foot cream or whatever. Marge, I know that you're talking about oil, and I've seen you using the Levo machine. Is that something you rely on, or is that something that you use just every now and then when it calls for it?
I use it every now and then. I'll be completely honest. I have like 4 different infusing machines at this point. So it depends on what I'm feeling, how much I'm making in a batch as well. They're all pretty great, but they all have sort of pros and cons to each of them. So if I have to, I can still do it on the stove like the old fashioned way. And I was in Germany not that long ago, and I had to do it the old fashioned way on the stove. I didn't have access to all my devices. Like I had something to decarb the weed, but not make the actual oil. So I can still do it. I can still do it like like everybody else. I don't have to rely on the machines, but I do have a lot of machines. So
A few months ago, I had to do longhand to get the edible dosage calculated. Because now you just type it in, you type in your numbers into I use Hempster. There's tons of different
yeah.
sites. So you just type in your numbers and you get the ratios to what you want them to be. But I didn't have access to the internet and I had to sit there and longhand it. And I was like, okay, I still got it. That's sweet. So one last thought, it is springtime. Well, it's actually summer now. Have you ever dabbled in working with the baby fan leaves to eat?
Not really. And I'm very sad because I normally do grow like outside every year. And this year, things are not going in my favor. So I'm kind of disappointed because I really want to do some experimentation at the end of the season. But no, I haven't really. But I know a lot of people that talk about using the fan leaves.
The older the plant, the more fibrous the leaves. So you can't
Mhm.
eat the leaves. But if you have like a little 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot little start, hasn't really done too much other than leaf out, you can take those little fan leaves and you can salad them, juice them. A lot of farms I worked at, when they would do their first defoliating, they would just mass juice all the leaves because it's really, really good for you.
Mhm.
And that is actually very much a thing. People do juice them. I've seen fan leaf pesto.
Oh, that would be interesting. I would love to try that.
It has to be the young leaves because they're not as fibrous as the season goes through. So there's just like a little bit of a window where you get to eat some of the leaves. You could eat it right off the plant, I guess.
Well, I did have another guy on my show, Breeder Steve, not to name drop, but I just did. And he actually recommended that you could use the fan leaves in an infusion. But he had like a triple process, like a triple, forget what he called it exactly. I'd have to go back and look at the show notes. But he's like, there was enough cannabinoids in the fan leaves that if you sort of boiled them down 3 times in the oil, you would get enough to make like a pretty potent oil, according to him. And I'm assuming he knows what he's talking about because he's been in the biz for a while.
Marge, I'm wowed because triple boiling fan leaves, all my years, never heard of it. Using
Yeah,
the root bottle like that,
yeah,
never heard of it. That is innovative.
yeah. And that's what I love about talking to people in the cannabis community because I'm just learning so much stuff. Like I learn all this stuff and then I feel like I'm sharing it with my audience because they're learning right along with me.
I'm really glad we got a chance to chit chat this weekend. We got to bond.
Yes.
Now we're friends forever.
Yeah, yay.
Friendship bracelets and braid each other's hair.
I was
Anyone who's tuned in today, I'm sure will be tuning into your podcast. Where can they find you on Instagram?
It's Bite Me Podcast on Instagram. I'm on the other socials, but Instagram's the one where I actually open, I guess. I open Instagram and you can find my podcast on pretty much all the platforms too.
For sure. Well, thanks again, Marge. We love you.
Oh, thank you.
Said no matter what kind of pain and anguish life may bring you, oh, smoke it up, hold it down, and don't ever stop. Well, you can always find your smoking spot. Yeah, you can always find your smoking spot.
Hey, Smoking Spot fans. We're here to tell you about the newest launch from Centelligence Projects.
Over the last year, we've created the Cannabis Aroma Wheel. It's a sensory tool designed to help connoisseurs take their knowledge to the next level. So whether you're a bud tender, dispensary owner, cultivator, or you just love the smell of weed, you can better appreciate the cannabis in front of you.
Get your copy of the most detailed sensory tool built specifically for the cannabis industry and order your Cannabis Aroma Wheel today at centelligenceproject.com.